We, as I said, will be touring the horizon this evening on the mother of all talk shows. If you are listening to us in crystal clear FM in Washington, D.C., as President Donald Trump used to do, it's 105.5 FM. You can listen in not so crystal clarity on AM right across the United States, from coast to coast, from burning city to burning city. You can listen across the whole world, of course, on SputnikNews.com. But if you are watching, and 500,000 of you did last week, on any of the platforms that we're on, please tell other people. If you're watching on Facebook, either my own Facebook or RT's multiple Facebook pages, please share with all your contacts, all your friends, because algorithm is always lurking, seeking to divert attention away from what is the biggest show of its kind on the entire planet. It is the Open University of the Airwaves. There are no tuition fees, and you are positively encouraged to speak back to the somewhat undereducated teacher that is me. You can watch on YouTube. If you're there on my YouTube, please subscribe. You can watch on Twitter, on Twitch, on Telegram, on every platform that you could shake a stick at. But the important thing is that we continue to grow and grow this tremendous Open University of the Airwaves. As I say, we'll be dealing with issues large and small. You might think the issue of whether it's Merry Christmas or Happy Holidays is small, but the British Civil Service doesn't agree with you, because they've just issued a pronunciamento telling civil servants to avoid the term Merry Christmas because it might offend Muslims. This is a perennial lie. I have never met a Muslim who was remotely offended by anybody using the term Christmas. After all, this is a predominantly, if nominally, Christian country. Why would you change the name of arguably your premier holiday, the Christmas holiday, to avoid offending people who are not remotely offended? It is white people being offended on behalf of black people that is so prevalent in the cancel culture, in the woke wonderland in which we currently live. Speaking of which, I am Morning Star Bear. She wept, and the crowd cheered. In fact, they rose as a standing ovation. In Saskatchewan University, in a TED Talk, to a complete fraudster who had risen to the heights of being Canada's #1 standard bearer for the rights of Indigenous people, First Nation people, they call them there, the original Americans. She, actually from Russia, her family, her antecedents were farmers in Russia, another Russian act of disinformation, transformed herself right down to the eagle feathers, the headdress, the full Native American garb, and up she rose through the ranks of academia, through the political ranks, and the liberals, dewy-eyed, cheered and cheered and cheered, and it was all a fraud. How many times has that happened? How many white people are appointing themselves as the spokespeople for minorities that never asked them to be their spokesperson in the first place, and don't actually hold many of the views ascribed to them by their white champions? The Canadian example, only the latest. There was a spectacular one in the United States where a woman identified as black and went on to become a more than radical black leader, except she wasn't black and she wasn't leading any black people. She was leading white liberals with guilt loaded on both of their shoulders into controversies that were never chosen by the minorities being championed. And there are plenty of people like that here in Britain. The witch hunters of J.K. Rowling, for example, are overwhelmingly men. They're not women. They're not even trans women. They are male liberals who are witch hunting the most successful author in British history, bar none, who sold more copies than Shakespeare and Dickens put together. They are witch hunting her to the point that the Harry Potter cast are about to have a party to commemorate the anniversary of Harry Potter, but without J.K. Rowling, who gave them all a job. If I sound angry about all of this, it's because I am. We're asking on the poll, will you be wishing Merry Christmas or Happy Holidays? Cheer me up after my nightmare day and get voting on my Twitter feed, on my Telegram, and on my YouTube channel about that. Speaking of the channel, the manslaughter, if not murder, of 27 souls, mainly men, but including women, including teenagers, and including at least one small child, was the story that dominated at least a day in the British mass media, maybe two. Maybe they squeezed it out for a second day. But just like with the attack on the Liverpool Women's Hospital, they quickly put it down because it didn't suit the agenda of the people who dominate our political class and our mass media. I refer to the aforementioned liberals. Why do I say so? Well, it's absolutely abundantly clear that these souls were lost because the French authorities turned a blind eye to their attempt to illegally leave France and illegally enter the United Kingdom in bad weather conditions in a 30-foot rubber dinghy. As any fool knoweth, the English Channel is a very treacherous piece of water. To allow innocents, including children, including at least one pregnant woman, to set off on such a journey, which has been procured through gangsterism, through organized crime, through the paying of, it's said, £2 million a day to illegal people trafficking, is a crime against humanity committed by President Macron and his government in France. Some fools who don't have the nerve to openly advocate in the political arena for no borders at all, for 6 billion people to be allowed untrammeled to move into the space lived in by 1 billion people, they tried to turn the blame onto the government of the United Kingdom. Now, the government of the United Kingdom is guilty of many, many things. If it was up to me, most of them, if not all of them, would be behind bars in a prison cell this evening for the many crimes that they have already committed. But this was not one of them, for a multiple of reasons. One of the crimes the British government has committed is not to take their fair share of refugees. Every country in the world has a moral and legal duty to accept their fair share of refugees. And we have taken nothing like our fair share of refugees, not even factoring in that our country and the United States of America have created more refugees than all the other countries in the world, and therefore should be paying a premium of taking more than their per capita and their income per capita share of those refugees. By which I mean people with a well-founded and legitimate claim to danger and political persecution in the country from which they have fled. But many of the migrants on board these rubber dinghies, well, all of them are actually setting sail from safe countries, Belgium and France, but most of them are coming from countries where there is no war, where there has been no war, and ipso facto cannot qualify under the Act as people with a legitimate, well-founded fear of persecution. Let me take the example of some of the tragically lost in the English Channel last week. It seems that at least a quarter of them, maybe more, were from Iraqi Kurdistan. There has been no war or even sanctions in Iraqi Kurdistan for more than 30 years. More than 30 years ago, the British and American state effectively made Iraqi Kurdistan a client state, a base from which to launch military operations and economic and social destabilizations against the Republic of Iraq. There is no persecution in Iraqi Kurdistan. Or if there is, what are the British and American outlets there who run the country with the duopoly of the political structures in Iraqi Kurdistan doing about it, saying about it? There is no fighting there. There has been no fighting there for 30 years. There is no oppression there. In fact, it's touted by the British government itself as one of the only democracies in the entire Middle East. Now, unless you are someone who has fallen so foul of that political duopoly in Iraqi Kurdistan that you are personally being persecuted, then you are not, in fact, a refugee under the meaning of the Act. Ditto Kosovo. There has been no war in Kosovo for 20 years. In fact, Kosovo is another NATO international protectorate. So ipso facto, there cannot be political oppression in Kosovo. Can there? Because we are running Kosovo, which we illegally wrested out of Serbia as we arrested so much of the former Yugoslavia into our orbit for geopolitical reasons. It follows you cannot be a refugee from Kosovo unless you are, for example, a part of the Serbian minority being oppressed by the Kosovan majority, which Britain and the United States funds, arms, and gives political and diplomatic cover to. Do you see where I'm going with this? We're not taking enough refugees. We're not taking remotely enough refugees. Nothing like our share. But somebody landing on your beach in a rubber dinghy and melting off into the night is not a refugee. When they're fleeing from France and Belgium, landing on your beach and disappearing, by definition, they are not refugees. They are illegal migrants. And unless you're one of the Trotskyites or liberals or free market capitalists that doesn't believe in borders, you have to accept the right, the responsibility, the duty of the British state to protect its borders. And here's the greatest irony of all. What is supposed to be a conservative government that wraps itself in the flag when it counts, that sends soldiers all the way to the Polish-Belarusian border to protect the Polish border, is doing absolutely nothing to protect our own border, unless you count escorting those that didn't melt away from the beachhead to a hotel for a long but indeterminate period, whilst a totally dysfunctional Home Office tries to process their applications for political asylum. Witness the man I referred to earlier that was today deported for the third time in 2 years from Britain. Well, he's only a people trafficker. Why should I be so hard on him? Or I could close with a much more serious example. The man who blew himself up in Liverpool, but who intended either to blow up the people at the Remembrance Sunday ceremony in Liverpool Cathedral, according to some reports, or the new mothers, pregnant women, and newborn babies in the Liverpool Women's Hospital, was denied asylum 7 years ago, but was still here in Britain, even though in the interim he'd been sectioned under the Mental Health Act for running around the centre of Liverpool holding a large machete. How's that for a Home Office? How's that for a Ministry of the Interior?